So, Aaron, I know that you've been, having a difficult time making decisions about, the kind of artist that you want to be. And I know that some of the relations that you have, both to your traditions and your heritage and to the possibility of having choice, free will in a certain sense, choice to choose content that relates to who you are and explore the possibilities of developing in ways that belong to you. I know that these issues have been difficult, and I thought I would talk about my own experiences in certain ways. And I had been thinking of a lot of things today. I had been thinking about that story that I told about watching the cartoon when I was a child. The folk story of John Henry and his sledgehammer, and he challenges the machine, and he wins. He outperforms the machine, and then he dies. And I had thought about that. The difference between a machine and a man, or a machine and in your case, intelligence. And what makes a person a person, and if it's possible to be a person within a mechanical way of understanding and existing in the world. And we have the expression "the ghost in the machine," and that to me could mean a number of different things. It could mean that we want to ascribe entities intelligence to help us understand them, but it could also mean that there are intelligences that we perhaps don't perceive readily with the senses, the senses that concretize and materialize and find themselves, entirely in the physical world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these hidden intelligences don't exist. And I think about the way that when God came to Samuel, he came to Samuel as a voice, not as a material form, And even this voice, you could say that the sound, the physical sound, was the embodiment, was the material embodiment of this intelligence. But one of the things that a psychiatrist will ask you to determine whether you're sane or insane is, do you hear voices? And these voices that they ask you about aren't voices that everyone hears, but that you hear inside of yourself. So hearing God in the way that Samuel did is one of the definitions for insanity. And if you tell one of these psychiatrists that you hear voices, or if you tell one of these psychiatrists that, even if you say, well, I hear the voice of God, that's, significant rationale for them to lock you away, which being locked away is a form of being placed in chains. And this hasn't changed much over time. The holders of these voices have always been considered dangerous, and the holders of these voices have always been placed in chains, whatever name that they've been given. So I was thinking about voices, and I was thinking about the voices and as something from within the inner speech that Lev Vygotsky talks about. One of the few theoreticians of language and learning who actually recognize the significance of the inner voice, the inner speech, in both the development of the child's ability to use language and in processing the information of the world. But I was, thinking about all of these understandings of voice and voicings, and I thought about a labyrinth of visions in which the vision is multiple, but the vision is multiple because the voicings are multiple. The hearings are multiple. They echo within memory, chambers of memory, and it's the memory of these many voices that give rise to, in a certain way, that give rise to the vision, and or the visions. And one can get lost in those voices, but one can also be led, out of the wilderness by such voices. I've had voices that have helped me survive many things. When I was assaulted by the police and with tasers, and I was tasered with three taser guns, and the first set of darts went into my chest on my right pectoralis major muscle, and the taser gun has two darts. This is what facilitates the conduit of electricity, and the two darts entered my chest, and then the second dart hit me in one of my shoulders, and it's interesting now, I can't remember which shoulder it was. But, one taser is supposed to be sufficient to, they cause extreme amount of pain, and they inhibit your ability to move, and thinking becomes difficult. It very much reminded me of the experience of being in, I swam once in the East River in the middle of winter, and the water is, there are, if it's cold enough, the surface of the sea freezes, and in this case, it wasn't that cold, but the water was at the edge of turning to ice, and I remember in that cold, my ability to breathe collapsing, the pressure on the lungs becomes unbearable, and it's almost impossible to move your muscles, and you lose the ability to think, and being tased is somewhat like that. So the first one hit me in the chest, and that one didn't knock me down, and then the second one hit me in one of my shoulders. I can't remember which, and then the third was fired into my back. And I remember the exact spot in my back that it was fired into, because later I would have these sensations of tingling in that spot. And it wasn't unpleasant. It was almost like a shudder that rushes through you, but not an unpleasant way. Yeah. And so I remember the exact location of that one. I could point to it with my finger if I could reach that spot. But anyway, Aaron, when these tasers, were electrocuting me, and I heard a voice, and it was one of these voices. It was one of these inner voices that they ask you about when you see the psychiatrist, and it was very simple. It didn't feel like my voice, and no one else could hear it. It was neither external, nor was it that inner voice that Vygotsky talks about as being natural to humans. And the voice, the first thing that it said was, scream. And I had been able to, over time, learn to trust certain kinds of voices. So when the voice said scream, I did so. And the scream was really intense because there was a lot of pain. Extreme amount of pain. So an extreme scream. And then the scream had a function. It seemed to provide some clarity. Like it made it possible for me to think again, because whatever it was, but the outpouring of the expression cleared my mind. It gave me back access to thought and movement. And then so after I screamed, then it gave me a second instruction, which was pull them out. So what they are these little barbs, little metal barbs in pairs that go into your flesh. And the reason they're in pairs, like I said, is because they form like a circuit. And so with each shot, you get 2 barbs. So I had 2 barbs in the pectoral muscle. I had 2 barbs in the shoulder. I think it was the left shoulder, now that I think about it, but I'm not entirely sure. And then 2 barbs in the back on the left side. So I pulled them out. I began with the one on my chest, and then the one on my shoulder, and then the one on the back, because it was more difficult to reach. I pulled out last. And so the voice was very practical, in that case. And so I thought about that voice, and I thought about the many voices of the past, and the voices of poets and others that went into a labyrinth of visions. And I thought about these questions that psychiatrists ask always about whether you hear voices, and I thought about dreams and the different kinds of voices that we might hear in dreams, or different kinds of figures that we might hear in dreams. And I thought about the voice, crying in the wilderness. And I thought about the way that Charlie Morrow, uses that figure of the voice crying in the wilderness to talk about voices. And I thought about Psalm 29, and I thought about these representations of these voices of God that are performative, right? These voices, they're not descriptions; they're actions in the world, right? And they're more than inner voices, but they're also metaphors for inner worlds, right? So when you say the voice of the Lord is the power of thunder, then both is the voice outside and the voice of the thunder, but the voice that the thunder speaks for, and all of these other things. But it's also the inner voice of the inner thunder, the fire of God, right? It's the fire of the Spirit that exists inside of us, the Society of Friends, the Quakers, have this idea of the inner light, so you could imagine that it's not just one inner light. It's the light of the universe is also an inner light. So everything that belongs to the outside belongs to the inside via the conduit of this metaphor, whether it's the metaphor of a voice or light or something else. And I thought, for some reason I thought of Ricardo N., whose last name I can't pronounce, but from SUNY Albany, and that literary journal Off Course, and him writing me, a note on a labyrinth of visions, and stating that I seem to be unaware that lyric poetry, since Rimbaud, has suppressed the use of the lyric I. And I thought, maybe when I received that he perhaps hadn't understood the way that I was trying to embody the idea of a kind of lengthy ancient psalm, but to do so with very modern imagery and much taken or stolen or rewritten or heard or overheard, or these voices from across history, but many of them from the 20th century. And it seemed to me that in making this poem, at the beginning of the 21st century, I was making a ghost song of the 20th century. And that ghost song was, like a psalm, like a ghost psalm, right? A psalm of the 20th century, filled with all of these voices, these many voices, but also voices that, ancient voices and archaic voices, much earlier than the 20th century. And I had thought about how my use of I and you was, a kind of way of talking, the way that, the poets and scribes and singers of the Psalms, David and others, use the I and the thou to speak back and forth across the divine, and I had thought that the structure, in some ways, would be apparent, and and I had thought that the sections would be something like, the individual psalms. They weren't numbered, of course, but they were given titles, and I thought that speaking across the I and the you would relate that idea, as well as, these ideas of the inner voices and the inner speaking, and what was allowed and what wasn't. And so I thought about all of those things, and I thought about the way that losing one's own voice, or the inability to speak, is also a relationship with the divine. And I thought about, all of those times that, my voice fails to carry me across language, at things that are too difficult to speak of, or that one is not permitted to speak of. And and then because I guess I had thought about this, story of John Henry, and the way that this cartoon that I had watched in the early 70s had tied this story to the civil rights movement, and how I had cried in experiencing this, and how that crying was very similar to the experience that I have had of losing my voice. And I had thought about being in the Mennonite church, and when they sang the songs about Jesus on the cross and giving his life for others, and then I would be unable to sing, but I would be able to cry. And that was another experience that I had when people would assault you for such things, because it was outside of their understanding that you would cry at such a thing. It's always been interesting to me that the loudest voices in religion are the ones who seem to understand its deepest principles the least. And we certainly see that today. And I thought, I remembered that, thinking about these voices, that in the Mennonite church, I don't remember how old I was, but the occasion was their Christmas celebration, and they have a presentation, and it's almost like a pageant, and the children, it's a kind of going up, or it's kind of ascent, right? A song of ascents, and you would go up. You would have memorized a passage from the gospel, one of the descriptions of the birth of Jesus, or something related to that part of the narrative, and you would go up and you would read this passage, and then you would descend, and then someone else would go up and read another passage, and And I don't recall, which passage that I had, but I do recall that I had spent days memorizing it. And so the voice of this text, was in my inner voice. I had it. So it was very clear. Like I could reiterate, this text very clearly. I could speak the passage, the voice, with my own voice, and I had practiced. I knew it very clearly. And when it was time for me to go up, then I ascended to the stage, and I looked out, and there were all of these faces in the crowd, and it wasn't stage fright. It was something else. And my external voice was completely taken away. I was unable to speak. Utterly silent. And I remember afterwards, the response was very similar to the response that I got from the tears and my expression of my reaction to my understanding of the connection between, those who had lost their lives in the civil rights movement and this like indomitable spirit of this figure from this folk tale, John Henry. And particularly I was moved by the fact that John Henry's wife takes their child and walks away from his performance of competing with this machine, because she's aware that he's going to sacrifice himself in this contest and that she can't bear to watch it. That particularly moved me because I thought about all of these women who, it's not just women, it's, men too. Men lost their wives as well as wives lost their husbands, but that lost their most beloved family members, and the struggle for rights, for civil and human rights in these actions. And I thought about how real that is, and it didn't matter to me that it was presented in the form of a cartoon. It was very much a real part of our lives and our history. And so in the same way, the other children teased me afterward. Not teased me so much, but really condemned me. The accusation was I ruined the the accusation was that, I ruined the presentation, I ruined the performance. I couldn't really explain that I was emotionally overwhelmed, but I had become emotionally overwhelmed in similar ways in other experiences of the divine, and to me, what represented like the deepest part of the human spirit, and so I couldn't really explain that, and it wouldn't have made any difference if I had been able to explain it. So, for whatever reason, I wanted to bring all of those things together in those thoughts about voices and silences, and attempt a reading of Psalm 29 for you, Aaron, today. And I recognized that I probably wouldn't be able to get through it because of the same problem, the problem of the voice being taken away. And I kind of wondered if I used Ricardo N's strategy, if I would be able to get through it better. That is, to take out the name of the name, or to rewrite it in some way. And then I looked at the text and I thought, I don't see how that's really going to work, because the name is so important to the word of the poem, and it's throughout, and the name is signified in a variety of ways, and even referred to self-referentially. So we'll just see, and I thought I would try to give a reading of this and allow certain silences and echoes in, and not be fastidious about the exactitude of the memorization, but rather to find a way through it so that I could speak it in a way that relates to what we're talking about, like the difficulties that you're having in finding a path to being the kind of artist that you feel expresses who you really are, rather than being defined by sets of rules, or drawing codes, or ideas of line and art and form as a kind of grammar from outside, imposed on your processes of your expression. And we'll just see how it goes. Give unto the name, ascribe unto the name. Recognize and remember the name. Remember the character of the name. Remember remember the actions of the name. Remember the belonging of the name. Ascribe unto the name. You mighty, you divine, you divinest, you heavenly beings, creatures, entities, minds, voices, belongings, hearings. Remember of the name, give unto the name, ascribe to the name glory and strength, power and light. Remember of the name, celebrate of the name, give to the name, ascribe to the name, the glory due the name, the honor due the name, the significance due the name, the meaning of the name. Worship the name in the splendor of the name's holiness. Adore the name in the glory of the name's sacredness. The voice of the name is over the waters. The name of glory thunders. The name thunders over the mighty waters. The name thunders over the sacred waters. The name thunders over the divine waters. The name thunders over the divinest waters. The voice of the name is power. The voice of the name is strength. The voice of the name is my rock. The voice of the name is majestic. The voice of the name breaks the cedars. The voice of the name shatters the cedars. The voice of the name causes the cedars to tremble. The voice of the name splits the cedars. The name breaks into pieces the cedars of Lebanon. The name shatters the cedars of Lebanon. The name splits the cedars of Lebanon. The name makes Lebanon leap like a calf, like a young wild ox. The voice of the name strikes with flashes of lightning. The voice of the name shakes the desert. The name shakes the desert of Kadesh. The voice of the name twists the oaks and strips the forest bare. And in the temple all cry, Glory, Adonai.